Okay, so welcome everybody to the last final session of this conference. Um, my name is Somanathan and I'm at the ISI. I'll be moderating this panel discussion on reforming the teaching of introductory economics. Actually, it's more about thinking about how we ought to teach economics to people who are not going to be professional economists. So it's kind of broader. So we have a very distinguished panel. So first we will start with Rajiv Sethi and Homa Zarghamee from Barnard College. I think Rajiv is a well-known economic theorist and Homa is a well-known behavioral and labor and public finance economist. They've both been involved with the core project and they'll tell you about that. So they'll begin and talk for a total of 15 minutes, both of them together. And then we have Nicolas Gravel, who is director of CSH, that is Center for Human Sciences. I don't want to try to say it in French. And this panel is also organized in collaboration with CSH. We're very grateful to CSH for our long-standing relationship with them, particularly yesterday evening. So Nicolas is a well-known theorist and public finance economist. He's professor at Marseille when he's not here in Delhi hanging out with us at the ISI. Then we have Thomas Turner, whom you heard from this morning, well-known environmental economist from the University of Gothenburg. And finally, Nicola, maximum of 10 minutes, and for the three remaining panelists, maximum of 10 minutes each, so that then we can have everybody can participate and we can have a bit of a back and forth among the panelists also. And finally, we have Arvind Subramanian, who's the chief economic advisor to the government of India, well-known macroeconomist and with a long career, a distinguished career at the IMF and Peterson Institute and elsewhere. So welcome everybody, and that's all. So let's begin. I'll try to keep time. Please try to stick to time so that I don't have to do it, but I will keep time if I have to.
Okay, I'll come with you.
Hi everyone, I'm Rajiv. This is my colleague
Homa, yes.
And I have been involved with this project for about 5 years now. Homa came on board about a year ago, I guess. And it started off just very briefly when I just got an email out of the blue from Wendy Carlin of University College London, and she was organizing a meeting at the NBER in Cambridge, and said, they were thinking about, they had received an offer for grant funding, for looking into developing resources, superior to what currently existed for the teaching of economics at various levels, but starting with the introductory level. Some of what we're going to say you can find on the website. You can just Google core econ, and there's a lot of information there, but let me just run through some of the basics. The idea was to create an open access platform that developed resources for economics available in digital form freely worldwide. Basically, the marginal cost of producing an extra unit of a digital product is essentially zero. We wanted to market it at zero and get foundation funding to get it started. And there's a paper copy, a book with the Oxford University Press that is not priced at zero, but most of the, all the material is available online. The first thing that was released was this e-book called The Economy, and I'll tell you a little bit about it, and we'll go through a couple of sections of it and hand off to Homa in a minute. It's a print copy with Oxford University Press. There's a digital copy online, and then there's an app for the Android system that's been released, and the Apple one will be released soon, so I'll just go through that. We've got a lot of media, but just want to point out a couple of very nice pieces. This was Ryan Avent at The Economist, who had an interesting piece on it, and then John Cassidy in The New Yorker also. So those are nice introductory overviews. So before we get into the content, there's about just an overview of usage. So we've got about 60,000 registered users from 186 countries. These could be students, it could be just random people who want to learn something about economics. 6,000 registered instructors from 131 countries. Here, India is number 10 with 107 instructors. We only know about 3 or 4 of them. I mean, we don't know who, we don't know who is using it, but they could be just looking at it and they could just be looking at it, for possible future use or just curiosity. But those who are certified as instructors can get a lot of extra resources, for the teaching, lecture slides, questions, and so on and so forth. 60 universities confirmed using it in instruction worldwide. The Economy, as I said, was published in August in digital form, October, Oxford University Press in print. It's a big thing. I didn't bring a copy with me because I didn't want to get an extra suitcase. It's quite a heavy product. And it's already in its 5th printing in just a few months, the print copy, which is amazing for something that's free online. You don't have to buy the hard copy. The hard copy is it's in its 5th printing already. And there's a bunch of resources available for teachers. French, Italian, and Spanish translations are done. They'll be posted soon. Farsi is almost done. Portuguese is about to start. So this, and because it's open access, so it's not copyrighted. It's released under Creative Commons license. Basically, anybody who wants to translate can translate, and then we'll certify that the translation is accurate. So there's a lot that can be done with this. And the core organizations registered now as a non-profit. There's a bunch of foundations. I won't, all the names are on the website. I won't go through that. It's much more interesting to go through what's new about this, since this is about reforming economics education. You can just talk about the innovations. So from my point of view, there's 4 innovations involved in core. One is the process innovation. There's no author of this book. There's actually 23 people who have written it. I was involved in the writing of 2 sections and bits and pieces elsewhere. Across 8 countries, 4 continents, and this was coordinated and synthesized by 3 people essentially: Sam Bowles, Wendy Carlin, and Margaret Stevens. And what they did is to make it read like it's a unified structure, that it isn't disjointed. And I think they did a really good job with that. There's a content innovation, so this is the most exciting part from an instructor's point of view. It's really different. It's really different from the content you'll find in an introductory course that's taught maybe at the master's level for non-economists, or at the introductory level for undergraduate economics. We'll talk about that a bit. And there's a lot of historical and empirical evidence, a lot of data, but there's also engagement with theory, interesting theory. That's why I volunteered to teach intro after a decade or so. It's just not interesting to teach with the regular material, but when you have serious engagement with things like unobserved effort, incomplete contracts, games and information, and so on and so forth, in ways that are really quite interesting. There's a publishing innovation we'll talk about if we have time, and then there's an outreach into innovation which we're involved with at Barnard, which is really exciting also. So we'll share this with you in the remaining time that we have. These are the authors. So you've got people like Tim Besley, Suresh Naidu doing chapters on development. You've got Kevin O'Rourke, writing some of the historical material, Antonio Caprales, and various people, who are doing things that probably they know more about than one textbook writer. Let's say Mankiw knows about the entire field. It's just a collaborative effort, and some people contributed more than others. There's a discussion of content in this Vox piece. You can go and take a look, but we want to focus on a few things. I'm going to hand off to Homa now, but we start off with, we saw an example of a hockey stick graph this morning in Thomas's talk. We have a relative stability, at least in historical time, in carbon concentration, and then you get this shoot up. It's referred to as a hockey stick graph because it's got that roughly shape. And we start, the course starts off with looks at history's hockey sticks, about the cost per unit of producing luminosity, for instance, the speed with which information travels, GDP per capita, living standards, and so on. And just the big questions front and center, so that people just realize, what the classical economists were doing when they founded this discipline. Homa will talk about global income distribution. I'll talk, if I have time, about production and the choice of technique, what's different about our approach to that. A lot of stuff on games, incomplete labor market contracts, institutional arrangements and distribution, which we won't have time to go through, but these are all content innovations. So let me hand off to Homa. You have your mic up?
I think so. Do you hear me? Okay. So I want to show you, I encourage you to go to the website, because you can start reading the book for free immediately. You don't need to get a login or any sort of instructor credentials. Once you do get instructor credentials, you get all these resources like lecture slides, classroom games, answers to the questions that they post within the book, which is great. But I just want to give you a sense of the book. So here's the ebook, and just to see the basic table of contents, you start with First of all, a word that you don't see in economics textbooks ever, the word capitalist, which for some reason is equivalent to taking a heterodox approach if you ever mention capitalism and don't call it just a free market economy. But here, it's completely contextualized for students that are coming into the study of economics from an angle other than mathematics or engineering or something like that. So I think when people come into economics, they're thinking big questions. What does economics have to say about inequality? What does it have to say about climate change? These big problems of the day that we see, and instead of giving them any sense of that, we go straight to cost benefit, perfectly competitive markets, and these kind of, everyone here knows, not terribly realistic frameworks, which then gives us the problem of unteaching the earlier sections when we get into, well, oh yeah, we do have these big market failures, later in the course. The whole approach taken in this book is very different. It starts with big questions, and it goes through. We'll go through this first, this introductory bit on the capitalist revolution. But when it gets to, for example, game theory. It gets to indifference curves soon. When it gets to game theory, it's giving you a lot of the most cutting edge research. It's giving you links to it. You get these videos of economists, all sorts of things. The first model that you see of an industry is not a perfectly competitive industry. It's a firm with market power, and then you go to perfect competition, and then you go to externalities. And so you're not sending that subtle message like, most normal market is a perfectly competitive one, and everything else is a violation of that, or is an asterisk that you don't really need to worry about. So I just want to show you this first bit on income inequality, and what kind of sets apart, I think, this what you can do online versus what you can do in the paper copy of a book. And this really goes along with what students want to see, I think, quite a bit. So this first diagram that it shows you is a 3D graph of what's going to be income inequality across countries and within countries. So it starts with the poorest country by per capita GDP, and then on the depth axis, you're seeing the deciles of income. And so here you have Singapore, and here you have Liberia, and then that's like the top decile in the back, going from your poorest country to your richest country, and then it fills this out. So you have, in 1980, you have China at the bottom. The width is by population, so China has a large width. You have the US up here, and then you move through, and as you can see, kind of China over time, that's 10 years later, China over time is getting richer and richer, and you can see that the inequality, the share to the top deciles is getting bigger and bigger. And what's amazing about this is the first homework assignment that they're given, they're not only given this graph, but they're given all of the data behind it. So you get an interactive version of this graph where you can kind of, just by scrolling over a particular bit, you get what country it is, what the level of income is for that decile, and you have it for every year from 1980 up to 2014. And you have the Excel data. So the first exercise they have in the book is a data set. Pick 3 countries of your choice and see how the inequality, or like the 90th to 10th decile ratio, has changed over the last 20 years, right? So it's really, really interactive. It's really hands-on. And I could show you, I mean, it's just a click away, but I just want to kind of go through a little bit more with you as well. So you get, another thing to see here. These are these hockey stick growth, right, that we talked about. You see this hockey stick graph, and again, you can flip through these graphs pretty neatly as you go. And then this is another feature. You have these great economist sections, so every bit has an economist, like say Adam Smith, or it could be much more recent, like Elinor Ostrom or something like that. And these are the homework, these translate into kind of homework type problems, the exercises that you have going throughout, and then you have these kind of, as you go, you can see the extent to which you're understanding things, these kind of quick questions, and you can click on it and see if you're right, which the students seem to really love. Just to show you You get the environment, again, entering the textbook very early, and not just as lip service, but it's content bit very early on, and these are running examples that go throughout the book. So we see these graphs that we're pretty used to look pretty recognizable from this morning. Did you want to do the next chapter?
Do you want to go through the thing to the inequality?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Just very quickly.
Okay.
We have like 3 minutes left.
Yeah. So here's that. Oops, that bit I was talking about. Where'd it go?
Yeah.
Here. Oops. Yeah. Was that the 1980? So here, like I said, you can go through this and you have the actual numbers for each, for each country, for each decile, right? Which the students love this. I mean, this is exactly what they want to think about when they think about the economy, not like, Bob wanted to buy a CD and didn't know if he should drive to the store or go to the campus store or whatever it might be. So yeah, I actually think you should do the next one.
I'm going to skip back to the slide. So basically, all the data is available for all these figures. That's the okay. So we've stepped past the.
Yeah, go to the tab up there.
Where?
There, the second. No, to the left. Yeah. There.
So will you update this data too?
We'll update.
Yeah, they actually are very responsive to, first of all, if you find any glitches or anything in that, they're in real time responding to these. And they do updates on a fairly regular basis. Actually, in all the papers, you get links to papers within a lot of the homework assignments are things like links to outside articles. I mean, things that, as someone who's been teaching intro for 16 years, I would add into classes. Oh, go find a newspaper article that relates to this topic. They've already done this. They've found like the best newspaper articles for you, and so you don't need as many supplementary materials, I find, coming from outside in order to,
Okay, so there's no time for me to go through this production thing. That's okay, but there's something I really want to do for the graduate students that's important and that we've been working on. But basically, so we were going to do an empirical thing like the inequality, but the theoretical topics are also interesting. And I just basically project the book in class. I don't bother with any slides or anything because you've got these slides within the book, and it builds up the figures the way that you would build it up on the board, and you can go through quite detailed theoretical work with that. But I'm going to just leave you to explore that on your own. But I just want to go through a couple of things. These are the sort of videos that you have within the book. Anat Admati on banking, for example, Stiglitz, Piketty, Duflo, they're recorded pieces with us about how they actually approach their work and do their work. And that's linked to the material in the topics in the book. There's a publishing innovation. If you want to go take a look, this is actually fascinating. I learned a lot about publishing through this. This is Arthur Atwell's blog. He's with a company called Fire and Lion in South Africa. And because what we were doing was kind of exciting to a lot of people in media, MIT Media Labs got interested and they said, look, there's only one company that can do this for you. You've got to go to South Africa. So Wendy and Sam went to South Africa, got this company, and they took the same source material, simultaneously produced digital and print content, and Oxford University Press really didn't have to do anything. They had camera-ready copies all produced. And that means that we can do editions, and there's an Indian edition in the works right now. But you can do editions that basically can be produced now at very low cost and therefore sold. The print copy at very low cost, digital copy for free. There's an app, it's available right now, you can take a look, so you can read this thing quite well on the phone. And this is the Oxford University Press. It's priced at about 1/6 or 1/7 the price of Mankew's textbook in the US. This is the project. If you give me just 2 minutes extra, I've got 0, but you're going to give me 2 more. This is a project that Homa and then a colleague of ours, Belinda Achibong, and I got about $300,000 in funding for. And this is really geared towards getting graduate students who have strong scholarship potential to also get enthusiastic and excited about teaching. Because the labor market in the US, at least, the academic labor market seems to bifurcate between those who target liberal arts colleges and are marketed as good teachers. And that somehow seems to appear as a signal of weak scholarship. And that's the link we wanted to break. We wanted to have people who express strong interest in teaching not be classified as people who are deficient in some dimension with regard to scholarship. So we screened. We used this funding to have a series of annual workshops. We had the first one in August, the second one is in July. I'm going to announce it. And I hope some people here will apply. But the idea is we screen on scholarship as well as teaching and certify the students. And this is the first academic job market in the US where we're going to see whether or not it has any actual impact. So let me just quickly tell you about that. So this is a Columbia student. It's very, very good thesis actually, on contract theory. Yes, yeah, he was one of the first cohort of the what we call the Cohort Eagle Fellows, and it's a very good contract theory. He's working with Marina Halak and Patrick Bolton, and it's on the job market now. But we also wanted to say, look, this is a person who's interested in teaching and has interesting ideas and is competent, and so we wanted to certify a cohort, a batch of students like that, which we did. This was in the August workshop. And the next one, I should have put a link up, but if you just go and Google Core USA, which is which is the organization that we launched in the US, you will find information on the next workshop in June. And if you want to apply, just we'll accept people who just are interested, have had a look at this material, are interested. And this is just an article in The Wire by Arjun Jayadev and some of the others about the Indian edition. So I'm going to stop, but I just want to mention one thing. This workshop, August and June, we'll take about 50 people. We took about 50, 30 odd, 20 to 30 graduate students, and just work through some of this material in more detail than we've been able to do over here. So if you're interested, just contact us. I'll stop.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe we can all move here. Gravel.
Okay, so can you all hear me, or should I use the microphone? Okay, let me use the microphone. Okay, so just so I'm going to say a few words. I mean, I'm going to say perhaps a few words about the core project itself, even though I've never been myself a user as an instructor of economics of that textbook and this. From the little I know, it seems to be very interesting. But I'm going to make a few comments at the end. I just want to perhaps make a couple of brief comments about, first, the importance of teaching properly economics at the basic level. I think it's, we should not understate this importance. And then I want to emphasize some aspect of the difficulty of the exercise. I think it's a difficult exercise to do, to teach well economic at a basic level. And I would like perhaps to point out what I think are the most important message we want to convey as economists if we want to teach at a very basic level, such as undergrad. Okay, so why is it important of teaching economics? Because I think the level of knowledge of economic thinking in the population in general is extremely low. And I just want to give you a few examples on that taken from my country. And in my country, there are many economists. Many of my colleagues are quite involved in making policy and advising policymakers at the very highest level. We have a bunch of economists that work with the Prime Minister, with the Ministry of Finance, and I guess we have the same in India. And so these people are extremely good, extremely sophisticated academic. They provide complex advice to these decision makers, but then very often they are hurt. They cannot go beyond because the decision maker will say yes, but the population will never accept that. So let me just give you a few examples taken from the policy debate we had in France on the housing policy in Paris. Paris, is a place where the housing is extremely expensive, the housing which is available on the free market, the housing for rental. And so there has been a policy put in place by the François Hollande government which aims at controlling the rent by, a landlord, so that landlords are not allowed to raise the rent freely. They have to get some permission and some bounds. So this was a law that was put into place to help the housing market in Paris to work better. Obviously, if you have done some basic supply and demand thing, that this is not the right solution to a true problem. Because obviously, it means that in Paris the amount of housing available to rent is small. The supply of it is small. So if you make it even smaller by constraining more those who have some apartment to rent, then you're not going to solve the problem. So I mean, this kind of, and then there has been a lot of debate, and the Macron government, even though it was, they wanted to change that, they say politically it's not feasible. Well, it's not feasible politically because possibly the level of understanding of these basic things in the population is not, sufficient. Because with some thinking, when you have your graph in the mind, I mean, it's kind of clear. Another example, and then I move on, is, on the same housing thing in France, we have these things in which we also give money to poor households to get access to their housing. We give them housing allowance. Okay. Several economists in France have estimated that the effect of this is that on 100 euros of allowance you give, 75 goes in an increase in the housing price because of this extremely inelastic supply. And so basically this policy is not very efficient because what it leads to is to further increase in the housing price. And so now there is a debate to change this policy, but it is received with a lot of opposition. And Macron started to reduce it by 50 euros per year, which is a small amount, and it was extremely difficult. So now they are thinking of stepping back. So all these are examples of policies where some better understanding of basic economics in the population could help. So that the advice I would give to many of my colleagues is rather to advise the policy maker is to teach economics well, at the undergrad level, at the basic level, and so that's why I think it's very important. Now it is difficult, however. It is difficult, and why is it difficult? I think there are many reasons for that. One of this is that economics, as we know, I mean, is not a completely mature science, and we have to be quite modest with what we understand about the functioning of a complex, system of interaction among humans and all of this. I mean, so our science is still, I would say, in a state of relative infancy. Perhaps this is true of any science because we know the knowledge advances, but I think it's more true in economics for various reasons that we know. And so this, makes, the effort to be, we have to be extremely careful in teaching things because we don't know that much. The things on which we agree is small, and so this makes the thing a bit difficult. This is one of the difficulty. When we teach undergrad or when we teach, at a very basic level for young adults, which then very often, at least the university systems is such that we teach to two types of students. Some students are intended to become perhaps themselves economists at a relatively high level, but some of them will not. And I think it's not the same teaching that is required for the two populations. If we want to train good economists, I think we need to go much further. We have to give them a lot of material with respect to the let's say the overall microeconomics and all of this. When we teach to I would say a business person or someone who is going to take a important decision, but who is not going to analyze the economy, we don't want to insist on the same thing. So this is also makes the exercise very difficult to try to kill two birds with one stone. It's kind of hard to do, and this is inherent to thing. And there is also the problem, of course, of economics is a conceptual apparatus. But it also deals with fact. And there are many facts to teach, and we must teach the fact. I mean, I like what I saw from the core project. That they insist a lot on fact. They show figures on inequalities or environmental change. So we need to teach this fact. These facts are important, but facts needs to be analyzed. And so the proper balance between the material we have to convey to the students undergrad, between the fact and the analysis of the fact, is difficult. So these are some of the difficulties. There are others, of course, but I wanted to insist on those. And now let me just, to conclude, I have 1 minute? 2. Let me just mention, I think, what are the main points that I think we should try to sell. What are the main strengths of economics, because, I mean, economics, we haven't done many things, we haven't construct, the physicists can be proud of what they do, they have their microchips are the result of physics, atomic bomb is a result of physics. I mean, we don't, I mean, for the best and the worst. In economics, we don't have that many things that, we have done terrible. So what can we offer to the people? I think the best thing that we can offer is the framework of thought. I think we have an extremely powerful framework for thinking about social life, I think. For instance, the ideas of choosing under scarcity, that the very basic Robbins program of choice under scarcity which is, consumer choice or producer choice. I think it's an extremely deep thing if it is understood properly. And it is, very often, if you take just a very simple example of that, suppose, that you want to tariff, and you all know the answer to that. But I mean, if you ask a person on the street, she will not know. I want to collect money from someone. And let's say if I'm a phone company and I want to collect money from the phone. Okay, I want to collect a fixed amount of money. I should either take it lump sum, or I could tax every use of the phone per unit. Okay, if I'm going to take the same amount from that guy, which of the two methods is the best? Immediately, when you do reveal preference, you know that it's a lump sum. But if you ask on the street, it's not at all obvious. And I think this kind of thinking is deep, and it's easy to convey in a classroom. And on this, we can teach a lot. There is what we are good also at is to teach in economics is good with modeling. I think interactions in a very convincing way. I mean, I think the general equilibrium story, the invisible hand, is a great moral lesson, as is the prisoner's dilemma. They say two different lessons. One says that the pursuit of self-interest does not necessarily lead to chaos in some institutional setting under general equilibrium. Quite to the contrary, it leads to Pareto vision. But sometimes it's the other way around. The prisoner's dilemma says that if we pursue our own interest, the collective interest is badly satisfied. So we have extremely deep understanding of these things. And these things arise a lot in all of these things. I think also we are not bad in doing what we call normative analysis, which is not at all normative, by the way. It's just the idea of formulating precise objective and deriving policies which contain from that. And so I'm going to stop here, even though I could have had a few things to say on these matters with respect to the core project. But I will say it in the course of the discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is it my turn? Okay, thanks. Okay, good. So I'd like to say three things. What to teach, how to teach, and to whom. Starting with what. This is the same as what we should do research on. It's a matter of what is economics. And I do think we need to think of new things. I think that in some areas, interdisciplinary work is very important. And looking at the full complexity of reality and not just of our simple model. But I also, economics has been very successful with this simplification. The idea of the atomistic, simple market is a powerful idea, and it's useful to think in terms of models. I don't think we should lose that. Take this essential idea that I mentioned this morning, that it's a good idea to have a price on carbon if you want to reduce the amount of carbon emitted and used. This is a powerful idea that comes more naturally to economists, and it is good that we push this idea and explain why we come to this conclusion. At the same time, however, you got to have two ideas in your head at the same time. Economists are supposed to be good at this. That's another great invention we have, economics, is that there's two reasons why a loaf of bread or a bottle of water costs 10 rupees. There's both supply and demand. Well, in the same way, we have to simplify and use models, but then jump out of the simplification and say, well, in the real world it's complexity. The price of carbon in this particular case may not be achievable for political reasons just now, so then we have to kind of see how we deal with that. So that's the what, of teaching. Then how, I've been getting involved with some innovation recently in teaching, and I teach at an engineering school, so they are non-economists, precisely like yours, and this is challenging. We have to, within 3 or 4 lessons, we teach them what's supply and demand, consumer surplus and a few other ideas, and then we start talking about environmental policy instruments. And they're very smart, these engineers, but they're a little impatient, and they kind of tell me, we don't really like lectures. And so, because I like lecturing, I think I'm kind of good at it. No, but the purpose of this course is not for my satisfaction that I give. It is for the students. And this is a very elementary and rather obvious point, but I really like the idea of student-centered teaching and learning, and so
as opposed to.
This is the professor-centered. So nowadays, a large share of my lectures, and particularly I've gravitated towards the more technical ones, if I explain discounting or something. I don't lecture about that. I lecture into a camera, and they produce these video clips. And the students look at these, and the smarter students probably do this double speed when they're waiting in line for food. And the students who are more challenged with maths, they can sit and they can look at it 3 times, and they can do some exercises in the book, and they can look at it a 4th time. And then they all come prepared to class. We put a lot of emphasis into creating a culture where they know that I will not lecture, and so there are questions, and they talk. And I wouldn't lecture this long. I would stop, and I would sort of say, "So, do you think this sounds interesting? Please, take a break of 1 minute and talk to your next door neighbor." And this activates people. Now, I'm not doing it this time. I was tempted to do it, but it's actually very good. Even 1 minute of what's he talking about? Is this really relevant for us? It activates, because we need oxygen to think. We need a bit of movement, and you need to pose questions. Would this apply to this course? You need to. It activates your thinking, and the learning is much better. So there's all kinds of things related to how we do this, and much more exercises and interactive. Now, the third thing I wanted to say is that I think it's good to teach Swedish engineers, but when it comes to climate change, we've got a whole world that needs to understand some really important things, and so we've been training PhDs, Gunnar and I, here for 25 years or something, and then they've moved back to their countries, and Gunnar in particular has created these centers of research. So we've got professors in Addis Ababa and in Bogota and various places who kind of know how we think and who've gone to my courses in the past. We're using the same books, we're using the same clips, and we can actually give a class in many places. I don't believe too much in, I think there's a problem with sending out MOOCs, and I don't know if yours is like a MOOC, but it looks much more like richer. But there are some people who will record a MOOC, and then they kind of, and people can sign up, and hundreds of thousands of people sign up. But you don't really know what happens if they really, there's little interaction with the instructor. I think the human interaction is very important. But we're trying to find a compromise in this capacity building project that we'll have. So we're thinking we can have a dozen countries taking the same course on the same, clips and books, with local instructors in each place who have actually the same vision of the material. And we think this could be a way of multiplying the effect and reaching a much broader group of people, which is more important. And it also gives the possibility to do these really interactive. I've designed some exercises, like what does a good trade deal look like, or something that are bound to give slightly different results in Tanzania or in Gothenburg. And then, we can let students interact with each other and exchange their answers, and so sort of global or local, both global and local, student-centered learning and teaching experience. So,
That's okay. Thanks very much, Thomas. Over to Arvind.
First of all, thanks to ISI for inviting me. If I had known that I could also do some self-promotion, I would have put up a little bit of my MOOC or my survey or whatever too. But I take it it's not about this. So let me say, just want to share my own experience over the last 3 years. Just to pick up on the kind of categorization that Thomas said, that who are we teaching to, and what is the objective? Who's the audience here? So I guess broadly there are 2 or 3 categories, and I've dealt with 2 out of 3 in the last 3 years. I think I would say the first category, something that perhaps Nicholas had in mind, was the intelligent consumer of economics is one. Second would be the kind of, reasonable, semi-decent producer of economics, and I work with a lot of Indian economic service officers and young graduate students from all over the world who come and work with us. That's second, and of course the third category, which I won't have anything to say, which probably preoccupies this audience, is the really, frontier researcher. And frontier student, as it were, the student who becomes a researcher. I'm kind of less interested in that. I just want to focus on the first 2 categories. Of course, I will give you one of the consumers in my role is also, trying to convince big people to look at, real, growth as opposed to nominal growth. Some really first basic things you want to get across is not quite your housing. That gets very sophisticated. But just on the the first point I want to make is that I think that and my experience is going to be different, because I think the kind of problems that this wonderful project core is trying to address perhaps is not quite the problem that we have in India today. It's a classic frontier versus some people who are trying to converge to the frontier. I think the pedagogical challenges, teaching challenges are very, very different. My own experience has been that these are all products of very good universities in India. I find that we've not done a very good job. So even the decent consumer and the semi-decent producer, that the raw material that I work with has been somewhat disappointing. So I think we need to go back and ask what's really going wrong here. And these are people from premier institutions. I'm not even talking about way out there. So that's my first observation. So I think we need to think about that. Second is that in the course of my work here, I've also done a lot of reaching out to students from not in Delhi but all over, and of course I think they're so poorly served by our teaching that it's not even funny. So both the the products from very good places and the products from not so good places, but on the other hand, the kind of sense of interest, engagement, curiosity, keenness that I see all around, I think means that we have to work much harder at this than what we've been doing so far. So my own small attempt at addressing this is, of course, the economic surveys that we do. As I say, I want every page to read like an op-ed, and not like a turgid piece of prose that economists churn out. That's one. And second, of course, I actually did a MOOC, maybe India's first massive open online course. But there what we did, and I was inspired by a fantastic teacher at the Kennedy School called Dan Levy, who teaches econometrics there, and he's just an amazing teacher. And what we tried to do in this MOOC that I did, my team and I did, was the economic survey is becoming part of pedagogical material in many universities. So what we did was we got all the teachers of this to come and attend this MOOC. And in a sense, so what we did was both try and simulate the classroom interaction by having all these things there, and then of course it also a lot of pedagogical material, it goes up and so on. I mean, I'm not sure it works or it was effective or whatever, but I think that the point I want to make here is that we have to try and achieve scale in India if we want to address this problem. So that's kind of one set of observations. The second set of observations, it's a point I think that my friend Devesh Kapoor always reminds me that economists are wonderful at saying apply incentives to others and conveniently forget about applying incentives to themselves. And here the point I want to make is that I think in all this we forget that I guess is that a lot of it is about the teacher and the art of teaching itself. I think that if we did a kind of teacher fixed effect in all these regressions of how successful teachers are, I think it's because it's hard, it requires a lot of effort. But the point here is that, certainly, I don't know about, certainly in the US, and I think, Rajiv, you alluded to this kind of stigmatization that takes place between those who do research and those who do. I frankly, it's a sign that we don't take this seriously enough, that, we have this, kind of caste system within economics that, the quote-unquote bright people are researchers and others. And so we don't really, incentivize the kind of, and we don't put our money where our mouth is. It's kind of, do we think that if teaching is so important, which I think is such a huge public good, arguably as much as research is, why don't we invest as much in creating the incentives for teaching that we do for anything else? So I think that, we need to think much harder about this, and this whole, I think getting good curriculum, et cetera, is one part of it, but I think the other part is much more basic. How do we create good teachers and not just good content, et cetera. A related third point is that my own sense is that it reminds me of the famous Yeats quote, which is that good teaching is, or good education is not about filling a bucket but about lighting the fire. And I think that we neglect that part. I think we can create very intelligent consumers, semi-decent producers, if we just kind of created this excitement about the subject, curiosity in the subject, engagement with the subject, that good teaching can bring about. So, and especially if we believe over time that both intelligent consumers, that, if you think about, the labor market and what we hear about going forward, that, learning is going to be about the ability to learn continually and not just kind of content that you pick up, some 3-4 years in university. I think that, that aspect of, lighting the fire, creating excitement, creating curiosity, I think that's a big part of, so I think so. I finally believe that if we don't have good education, it's because we don't have enough good teachers, and I would therefore shift the spotlight. And this is not in any way to take away from the wonderful things that have been done by CORE and others, the whole navel gazing that's going on in economics. But I think I would rather focus a lot more on the basics of what does it take to make a good teacher. And then maybe all the rest will kind of follow. Thanks.
Thank you. So before I ask the audience to sort of come in here, I just wanted to have a little bit of a conversation going here. I think there have been a couple of things. First, I think there was a suggestion in what Arvind was saying now, that CORE is, it's a great idea, but maybe what we have in India is we need something more basic, and that this is kind of, I think perhaps paraphrasing incorrectly, a little too fancy for us and isn't addressing the kinds of issues that Arvind faces when he talks to people whom he wishes had learned just a little bit of basic economics, right? So do you want to respond to how you think that core is going to deal with those kinds of issues?
Well, so I should say that I started teaching, and mic'd up, I think. We both just started using core this past semester. So I've been teaching regular various levels, but the equivalent class would be like an introductory economics course for a long time before that. And a lot of what I find the innovation of core is twofold, addressing actually what Arvind was saying. One is keeping the students engaged. A lot of the content is actually quite different. So the models that you're getting, for example, for like a labor supply and labor demand is a different model than the model that you get in a standard textbook. But I think the kind of pedagogical difference is that you're running with very vibrant examples throughout. There isn't like, oh, here's something that's maybe relatable, or, you know, why is it that we see this thing? Like if you look at Krugman's book or something like that, you get a one-page like application and then pages of theory that I don't think really connect for the students. And it becomes the teacher's job to connect those, and I find that core lubricates that process quite a bit. The student can, in reading it, see the depth of application, not just that this is potentially applicable, but is learning it through the application. And I find that to be kind of addressing exactly what was being suggested, that it's not particular, it might not be something that's exciting, but I actually don't think that this is a fancier anything. I think it's a shift of focus. Like I said, again, content is different, but it's not, I wouldn't call it fancier, it's just I think, much more engaging. And for the teacher, I think actually the question of content and teaching are tied up very closely together. This, like, Rajiv hadn't taught intro in ages for a reason. He didn't really want to. And this makes the teaching of intro much more palatable, I think, for somebody who's a researcher. I think that it's much more honest in a sense. It's much more current. You're engaging with material that's not from, I mean, really at the base, like, the last textbook innovation in economics was in 1938. We all see models of that same textbook over and over that have been rewritten, but it's like the same progression, same important themes, and this is just much more current. So I think it's a much more exciting thing to be part of at the teaching side.
I'll just briefly respond. I think this is incentivization of quality teaching is the first order issue. I completely agree with that. And there's a couple of issues involved with that. In the US, there's been this bifurcation. I could go even much further than what you suggested. NYU has a category of professor called clinical professor. You know, they have outstanding teachers, but their status is just completely different. I mean, their teaching load is going to be high. They're not expected to publish. There's this almost a segregation, actually, of the quality teachers and the quality research. Same thing when I see the students in the labor market, you know, because I've got this, we are in an odd position where we are sort of part of a big research university as well as a liberal arts college embedded in it, and we get a lot of applications where people signal, oh, I would like to work at a liberal arts college, and it's immediately seen as a negative scholarship signal, and that's awful, actually, because, you know, we want people who are excited about teaching. And one thing that we're trying to do, actually, is to incentivization I mentioned with regard to the workshops. We pay a stipend, you know, I mean, it's not much, $500 to every student with full costs covered, accommodation, travel, everything completely covered to come, together with the certification, which they can then take to the job market. We cover faculty. Faculty is supposed to cover their own travel because they use their own, you know, we want them to use their own research funds, get people who are just not looking for a vacation in New York. And so we incentivize on that side. But the real incentivization is on our side, what Homa was saying. We want to get the people. Chairs of departments want the best researchers, experienced instructors, and to be teaching intro, but they just don't want to do it. And they have enough weight, enough power to just avoid doing it. Is what, you know, I myself confess to have done for a long time. But what we're hoping to do is actually trying to completely change that equation. Oh, one last thing, sorry, I just mentioned this, sorry, I'll go ahead from now on, but imagine yourself a graduate student. I hope there are graduate students here who are interested in this. But imagine you're a graduate student. You go into a job market interview. You know, some people will be doing it in January this year, next year, or the one after. The chair, the people who are interviewing you at some point, even if it's a very top research department, is going to ask you what you want to teach, And the answer that they normally get will be, okay, if you're development, I want to teach development, graduate development, maybe undergraduate development, behavioral theory, whatever it might be. Imagine you go into the interview and say, I want to teach principles. People are just going to get taken aback. What's wrong with you, They would never have heard it. They would never have heard it. But if you explain that there's content out there that actually makes it interesting and worthwhile, that's something quite striking, I would say.
Well, and
I want to see if this happens.
Yeah, and ironically, that's exactly what a chair of a department should want, because if
And
you're
they do want.
enthusiastic about that, you're the person who's going to lead students to take further classes. I mean, that's the fact of the matter. They want.
They'd love to hear it. Trust me, the chair would love to hear it. They have to staff these courses, and they're filling them with adjunct professors, visiting professors, graduate students. Just look at who's teaching principles in these courses. It's not the researchers.
So you wanted to come back in with some. Do you want to do it now? Or?
Well, I mean, I just wanted perhaps to make some small comment on this, on what I know of this core project and book. I mean, you have obviously all of the material on the website, the free accessibility. I mean, the friendliness of this material, even the figure you showed us is very nice. I've never, myself used as a teacher or as an instructor these things, but I know it a little bit for somewhat strange reason. I happen to be the father of two sons. And for my unhappiness, I mean, my two sons are studying economics, and they have studied economics, and also for my unhappiness, they don't like that discipline very much. At least they don't, but anyway. And so one of my son actually was trained with this core project, and he was, he didn't have as good an instructor as Rajiv can be, or I mean, I'm sure that you can be, I'm sure, but I mean, so I had to work and to read some of this chapter of this, at least on the textbook. And let's say a little critique I would make of this textbook is the fact that as I was trying to convey, I think one of the things that make economics interesting and important is the kind of unity of the economic framework. For instance, the choice under scarcity that I was alluding to in this core textbook. I mean, there is one chapter that deals with this problem through a labor supply model, like leisure consumption choice in great detail. And then it is well made, but it is this problem. And then later on they discuss which is the same problem, two-dimensional, for the intertemporal things in some other chapters. But the kind of unity of the approach here is a little lost from a pedagogical point of view, it seems to me. So when you are a student, so you may not see like the remarkable unity of approach of these problems, which we used to have in, I would say, good old days textbook that of the kind you mentioned, the 38 found, Samuelson, all of this. I mean, is obviously, this kind of textbook, which I use myself when I was trained to, they were a bit boring, of course, and they were, the consumer theory for several chapters and the producer and, extremely heavy-duty things. I agree, But at least they, when they were taught by good instructor, they were at least succeeding in conveying this unity of point of view, which sometimes maybe, at least from what I've seen from this little things with the core project, may be perhaps a bit lacking. I don't know. I mean, it's a mild critique because I think it's a nice book.
I guess that's a feature, not a bug of the whole core enterprise. That to not have a unity of vision. I guess that's the. I just want to say a couple of things. One is that so in a sense, the whole debate in the US, to which I think core has responded to some extent, has been precisely this, there's been one paradigm and, alternative stuffs are not encouraged. And so that's been the kind of focus of this whole thing. Whereas, as I was trying to argue that in India, that's, I think, perhaps much less important. I don't know. Maybe Delhi School and JNU, perhaps the quality of education teaching will dramatically improve if you adopt core rather than your existing thing. Maybe we should do a randomized control trial on that. But that's one aspect of it. But I think that there's one great piece of good news in all this. I think in the last, let's say, 15, 20 years, and especially with the explosion of social media and things, we lament all of this. If you think about it, about 15, 20 years ago, the gatekeepers between the producers and the consumers were basically journalists and, those kind of people. But in the last 15, 20 years, many good, terrific economists have started communicating directly with the consumer. And I think that's been unambiguously good news for the profession in terms of just raising the quality of, the quality of, awareness, engagement. And so I think that's been kind of one of the really plus spots about what's happened in the economics profession over these last 10, 15 years, and with social media, which I think that's I think just wanted to note that that's I think that in India, I do think that we're kind of slowly catching up with that. I think we do have a kind of lively thing going on, but I think we need to make more progress on that as well. But I think, but if we can get better teachers, as it were, I think that it would be a big move forward.
Thanks. So I feel very enthusiastic. I'd like to start collaborating with CORE. Now, I do think
that's supply, but demand we don't know.
Yeah.
Demand is very elastic, actually.
I do think there's value in simplification, right? But it's a scientific process. It doesn't mean that every student has to start with the simplest model and then next term take the second most simple model and then get to reality after 5 years. There's something a little arrogant about this. Suppose someone in here said, they thought this carbon dioxide story is interesting. They asked me, why does carbon dioxide stop the heat from emanating from the surface of the earth? It would be arrogant if I said, well, go study chemistry, 5 years, chemistry 1, chemistry 2, chemistry 3. I would try to say, well, it's the shape of the molecule, it vibrates, and it picks up frequencies. I would try to, and I think we need to be a little respectless of other disciplines. We need to grasp, that's what the researchers typically do, to try to understand other subjects quickly. And we need to have a connection with reality. That's what motivates our curiosity. Then, of course, you need to go backwards and forwards between simplification and reality. And it's a stupid idea that you sort of start with a simple model and then, study several courses, but until you get to reality, that's a bad idea.
I did a paper recently, an experiment on the extent to which short lessons in economics will make people more selfish. This is something that's gotten a lot of, that has a pretty, not huge, but substantive literature. And there's a good deal of evidence that there's a selection into economics of people that are more self-interestedly oriented, but that there is a training effect. And the reason I think that happens is because we have a lot of potential stories that come out of introductory economics that lead you to believe certain things that if you're a practitioner of economics, you're reading the fine print and you know that that's not exactly what the book is saying. But if you just kind of pay attention for one semester, you get a very different message. Or you could at least mistakenly get a very particular message. And this is exactly what you see. The people who have taken one course in economics are the ones who have the most selfish behavior on these surveys and these experiments. And I think there's a lot to that. I think there's something that comes out of that introductory class that can easily be mistaken for. Think of everything as a one-shot game. Act in your own self-interest. Believe in markets. They're always going to give you the right outcome, et cetera. And I think a lot of what we have to do is find a way to do exactly what Thomas was saying and get the nuance into the introductory class, get the interesting stuff in there, without having to go into the level of detail that I think really is what we're good at. We're good at getting into that level of detail and parsing everything out. But to be able to give a kind of, more state of the art of where we're at as practitioners, as researchers, and not where we think you need to start in order to build up to where we are.
Okay, I think I'd like to give people here some chance to express their views. I think we've had a very, interesting back and forth about the importance of giving students, I think a number of really important points. One is to give students, to give students enough information about the richness of economic reality, data and facts, so that they feel motivated that this is not an abstract, sterile exercise. It's something exciting that we actually learn about how to understand the world. And at the same time, be able to not let them drown in those facts, but to bring out clearly some basic conceptual principles that we use about how to think about problems without oversimplifying at the same time, to stimulate them to think, but to give them the conceptual apparatus so that they have the apparatus with which to do that thinking. And that moving back and forth, I think, is not easy. That's one reason why teaching introductory economics well is really so difficult, because you fall into the trap of just teaching a simple model, which kind of can be really boring and turn students off, or you kind of give them a lot of facts, but then the underlying conceptual framework, the unity of basic resource allocation theory is kind of lost. So those are. And the other thing I think that's come out very clearly in this discussion is that we have an incentive problem within our profession, which is we don't have the incentive to really try hard to teach well. It's it's enough to just walk into the classroom, give your canned lecture and walk out, and that's it's up to the students. They can sink or swim. Who cares? So we have to change those incentives also.
As long as they can publish in.
Yeah, as long as they publish in the right places, we don't care. So, but let's So, Carla.
I'm just going to say that at our university we consider to use core, but I want to raise yet another issue. I think no matter what book you have and what kind of teachers you have, I think there's something basically wrong in the way we teach in the following sense, that they have excessive appetites for exams. There's way too many exams in economics. Students never get the time to think. They never get the time to reflect about the things because there's always an exam coming. Always they have to read for the exam. I think we are excessive appetite for that, and excessive appetite for specialization, that we're going to give each course is so separate from the others, and it is combined with exams, then the students never learn across small divisions in the discipline, that they should see things together. So I think these two excessive appetites, I think we have to correct at the same time that we're going to get new material to teach from.
Reminds me of a high school student who said, "Don't get me confused with percentages. We've got division this week, and percentages is next term." Well.
I had two comments, one on this unity issue and the other on the good teachers. So on the unity thing, I completely agree at one level with what Nicola is saying, but I think that we're not thinking about core necessarily or anything like it as being the way that an economics major learns every course. I think it's the first course in economics, and I think it's important to make that distinction because a lot of the problems, and we realized this in Thomas's lecture this morning, a lot of the real problems we're dealing with today really require interdisciplinary thinking. And so ideally we want the brightest minds to go through a curriculum where they're doing a bit of everything that they need to know to solve a problem that they're interested in, and that's often not in just one field. And so the thing that happens, I know my own kids got turned off studying economics, the first economics course they did, and they didn't want to do anymore. And the The thing is, I think that what the core can do is to say, what are all the things that are out there, and am I interested in any of the things that economics has to offer? And then, you know, a math major, computer science major, chemistry major can say, okay, I'm not interested in the rest, but maybe I can take this one course on environment that was really interesting, or I'm interested in financial markets, and let me take this one course that's interesting. So I think that the core, even if you go through very traditional methods, you might want some space in a curriculum that is just throwing a bunch of different facts in a not particularly unified way. And I'm not saying that that's what core is. I'm not saying it for a minute. But I'm saying that even if it were that, there's some value to that. So that's one thing. The second thing I want to talk about is teachers, because I completely agree with Arvind that the real dearth that we have is good teachers. The question is, how do you get there? And you know, when you move out of Delhi, we find that problem even at the ISI and the Delhi school, and it's very hard to get the best of our students to come back and teach here. But once you go beyond that, the problem just worsens. You're just going down this cliff very dramatically. And one of the only way that I see things changing is to create material that's two ways. One is create material that's freely available, that can be on the net, so that if teachers and students want to learn by themselves, then they can actually do it and break out of a syndrome of some kind. The second thing is for undergraduates to really, why can't they learn micro and at the same time apply it to the PDS, to the NREGA, to subsidies, to a whole bunch of policies, which is really trivial at one level. And it just needs to make it into the textbooks. But as long as we're just using textbooks that are written in a place that doesn't have those same policies, we're never going to find it in the textbook. So I think that part of the good teaching needs the good material. But after that, I completely agree. I mean, it's a very special relationship, and it can't be mediated through screens and the internet. It's very personal.
But you will agree the incentivization has to be there as well.
Of teachers?
I mean, of teaching as a...
You know, I don't think...
Or is it like the Haifa problem, you know, the babysitter problem?
I think that in the US, it's really this fact of this stigmatized alternative profession is very bad. I think in India, I don't think the incentive problem is... I don't feel
there are no incentives across the board, so period, you know. so.
I think that there's this constantly, I feel there's this huge gap because the students are just so incredible, and I feel they're constantly getting a raw deal. And just the students just existing there provide you incentives. I think the problem is that teachers don't feel empowered because they don't feel they know everything that they need to know. I know when I was an undergraduate teacher, what made me do a PhD is that I just, by mistake, looked at the American Economic Review and just couldn't understand anything in it, even though it was on the topic that I had lectured on that day. And so I think that it's feeling empowered. It's not incentives in terms of the way we usually think about them. I think teaching itself can be extremely gratifying.
But we're not even hired on the basis of teaching. I mean, even at the best teaching schools, it's not part of your interview process. I mean, very, very rarely, I think, is it?
We're not even interviewed.
But I mean, just if I can just say one word on this, I fully agree with this idea of augmenting the incentive to teach well, you know, as compared among, let's say, university and college professors, it is clear. I mean, all the incentives are put on research and very few are put on teaching. This is absolutely correct. But one difficulty I see, however, is that, you know, even for research it's hard, but I mean, the measurement of research output is relatively easy. I mean, even though, I mean, the measurement of good teaching is not as easy as that. I mean, it's not, you know, as easy to single out, identify a good instructor, you know. A good instructor. Well, it's not as simple as that. I remember that sometimes a student may like a certain instructor who is giving a very good show and all of that. But then, I mean, you know, you need also some content. You need to have some good, you know, a good teacher is not only someone who makes a good show and good jokes. I mean, it's important, but I mean, it's also important that it's, you know, it conveys, and you know, he teaches a lot of material and he trains, he learns. So, and I think part of the difficulty is there. It's not easy to measure the teaching output. It's not as easy as it is, and even though it's not easy to measure the research output, but I mean, it's certainly harder to measure the teaching quality. I mean, but this doesn't prevent us for, you know.
See, actually, on that, See, I think it's one of those things that if you isolate a bunch of students after thing and said who are the good teachers and who are the bad teachers, I mean, you would get a clear, unambiguous ranking. I mean, the difficulty is that how do you then, everyone knows. If I were to go to ISI and ask, is Arunav a good teacher? I know what response I would get. So I don't think maybe the problem is how do you kind of distill all that information up. But I think generally people know who are good teachers and who are bad teachers, and I think that I actually think it's these days getting much more difficult to see what is who's a good researcher and who's a bad researcher these days. I think it's a far more difficult evaluation question these days.
Yeah. So while we're discussing, incentives for having good teachers. What do you think about bringing in choice for students and making the whole teaching profession competitive? We have websites where you can rate your professors. What do you think about this as a tool? Maybe you could even link, how well a professor teaches to maybe their pay, how much they earn.
I think the incentive issue actually is really not on the pay dimension. I think it's on the stigma and status dimension, and that's really where we need to equalize more than anything else. But regarding the difficulty of evaluating teaching, actually there's one unit in Colombia. You may be surprised if you don't know this, but if there's one school in Colombia where teaching actually is valued and rewarded. It's absolutely critical for tenure. And it's not the undergraduate divisions, School of Arts and Sciences, it's the business school. And the business school is a cash cow. It brings in lots of money. You've got executive education. You don't have good teaching over there, you are punished for it. And so it can be done. But it's at the unlikeliest place in a sense. You abandon the undergraduates, but you're providing very good teaching to the people who are bringing in the big bucks. Although some of the students are bringing in big bucks also. But I just want to mention a couple of things in response to what came up earlier. I'll be very, very brief. CORE stands for, we should have said this, Curriculum Open Access Resources for Economics. And it's curriculum, not intro. And the goal actually is to provide a proof of concept which can be used to build field courses, graduate courses. Basically, the way we are doing the intro can be done at any level, and we're hoping that's going to happen. And so it's a very open platform. And finally, we're going to launch CORE India in October 2018. I think Arjun Jaydev at APU in Bangalore, and hopefully folks at Ashoka will be involved, but and we want to localize it. And then CORE Colombia in October 2018, also in Bogota, in CORE Colombia, eventually Nigeria and other countries also.
A quick question. Don't you have teacher evaluations at ISI, and do you have them at CORE? It's a question.
You want to answer that question?
Yeah, we do. I don't know what CORE, but we do have at an ISI. But we never know what the final evaluation is. But students do
disappears
evaluate.
into a black box.
Yeah. So, while hearing all this, I'm kind of little, confused because I'm thinking from this Indian kind of point of view. I want to get away from this Columbia, Delhi school, ISI point of view, right? This is like a different world, right? And when I go to universities to teach, and you talk to students, it's not about content. I mean, just think about what the student is studying economics for, right? So at the end of it, what is the person being asked to actually, what is it? Where does he actually gain something from it, right? What are we asking at the end of doing a bachelor's 3 years? He's ending up in a university which is maybe a higher university, which is asking him, do you know math and how do you know how to add series and various kinds of mathematical stuff? Or he's going to companies which are kind of asking him, hey, did you learn some computers on the side? Can you do some machine learning kind of stuff? It's not really, and we face the same problem, by the way, in ISI. I'm placement in charge. And I have companies who are basically looking for essentially guys who can do, like these guys are good in math, they can, and good in programming, coding, this is what we want. So there is an industry side of it. Let's think about what is required from teachers. If and I don't know how many of you are, if you look at the qualifying exams to be a teacher in India, right? I'm sure Aruna will not pass that exam. Okay? These are questions which, these are and it's a deeper point. It's that when you're trying to make small, I mean, we're doing a great thing in trying to, make this all customized and nice and understandable. But if you don't do it in a big way, which changes, the thing for everyone, right? You're going to be basically a student who's learning how to teach will end up taking an exam to qualify to be a teacher in Delhi University or any university in India, which is going to ask material which is completely alien to you. It's because everyone else in India basically has to learn what committee is on, and very soon we'll have to learn what was Arvind's, you're the third one or the fourth chief economic advisor. I mean, these are the kind of questions that are asked. Who was the member of some black committee meeting, black committee for something. But I don't blame the guys who are asking, because this is an exam that has to be fair to everyone. And if you go outside Delhi, this is basically what is taught. So if you come to Delhi, if you come to Delhi University, to Ashoka University, or various kinds of university where a lot of us who are from ISI Delhi School or returned from the US are teaching, we might find this all great and this way of pedagogy great. But it's going to be very alien in an environment where everything else is different. So either you make a big move and you make a whole, a change in a big way, or else the students will come to a point where they say, yeah, we are doing a master's in ISI, but on the side we are actually, training to, taking the NET exam and somehow passing this exam, because it will just ask completely different things. And I think a lot of people have told me this, that, whatever is taught in Delhi School and ISI, these are not relevant for being a teacher. I mean, these are important for interviews and stuff where you get faculty from one of these institutes coming in. But the exams are completely different, right? So you have to think about this when you actually get into the developing world, where I think this is not an India problem. This is a problem probably in many parts of the world where you have generally very different kind of teaching that has happened, right?
It's a very, very good point, I think.
Actually, kind of a similar point, though, to what Rohini was saying, too, that I think with economics, there is a question of what you're going to do at the end of it. Why is this important? So these are issues that maybe are interesting to think about, and you want to know the state of the art of thinking about them. But what does a practitioner of economics do? And you're absolutely right that an introductory course does nothing to really get you much closer to answering that question. What I think is really great, I took a law class as an undergraduate that was called The Nature, Function, and Limits of Law. And I always thought it would be great for economics to have something like that, like for the introduction to it, to actually tell you something about all the different things you can study with it, to tell you what your value added is, which is nebulous. It's not an obvious thing, I think. But
can I? I mean, I'm not. Sorry. No. Then I hope the question is not, who was the rude CEA who interrupted others, in some exam will come up. So the answer will be obvious. In a sense, you said it much better than I was trying to say, that in a place where, basic education capacity, etc., are so weak in India, how do you change that on scale? And the only thing I will say is that, and it's something that Rohini said also, which I will echo, that I think the fault is not the students at all. The distribution of quality of students, I think, is however measured, underlying, I don't know, across the world is I think identical. I mean, the youngsters that I deal with on an ongoing basis, or I give lots of talks across the country, and there are hundreds and thousands of kids who show up and ask questions. I've always been impressed by their basic underlying quality, how engaged they are, how curious they are, and so on. The problem is, that we're not able to, kind of provide what it is that takes to take them with that raw talent into, making whatever good, as I said, either intelligent consumers or intelligent semi-producers of this. And so scale, I think, it's scale, having to achieve scale where, the first order problem is not whether you have a common vision, a kind of paradigm, or you have to have competing paradigms of thinking, but something much more basic than that.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight a dilemma that I faced when teaching at all levels, undergraduate and graduate, which is the balance between ideas and and the tools of economics. And I was an undergraduate with economics majors, but I think I was so bogged down in learning about indifference curves and cost functions and isoquants that I never, the major insights escaped me completely. And I find here, for instance, I'm teaching people who come for masters, and sometimes I find that while they can be very good at knowing when there's a corner solution, when there's an interior solution, but again, we would like to know what. So this is a dilemma, because if you just focus on the ideas, then the course itself seems to lack any foundations. It seems to be all very free floating, and at the same time, there is a. It's distressing that because what Nicola pointed out right at the beginning is that if you want to spread economics literacy, it would be better if it won't matter 30 years later if a politician didn't remember the indifference curves, but if they remembered what happens when you ration a market or something, what happens. So I don't know how does the textbook writers deal with it, because you need a balance between the two.
Can I respond briefly? So this is such an interesting point. So basically, this affects selection into economics. There are students who love the tools so much they don't even care that they're not connected to ideas. They just like to do these problems and they succeed. And this is affects selection. Who comes into economics and stays into economics? The reason I wanted to do, of course, we didn't have time, but I wanted to do production. How core deals with production, is because one thing that I have always really, really hated, maybe this is just me, is isoquants. I hate isoquants. The idea of continuous substitutability between factor inputs with some nebulous capital and labor continuously moving along some curve, I find appalling. So what core does is it uses an activity analysis approach, right? You have technologies that are in certain input space that produce output, and there's a limited set of points that are feasible. And of course, you can have continuous isocosts lines, and you can find, you can show how the choice of technique is affected by the changes in the cost of inputs and so on. So you get the tools applied. It's more sophisticated than this isoquant approach. And you still get the basic insight. And then it is linked. And this is what Homa was saying. We start off with the Industrial Revolution. And, and this is linked to the fact directly that, according to some historians who are also featured in core, that Britain had massive mechanization of cloth production because of cheap coal and dear labor. And this is an hypothesis of individuals, and you can link this directly to the activity analysis approach to choice of technique, and you switch as coal becomes cheap and labor becomes expensive, you switch to this highly mechanized cloth production, and so you link it to the history. So we try. I mean, there are plenty of problems with core. For one thing, unity is going to be compromised if you've got 23 random authors spread across all these countries. But Margaret Stevens and others have done a terrific job, I think, of getting unity. And I think there's a fair amount of unity between the scarcity choice and the intertemporal choice. I actually feel those are quite connected, but there is disunity elsewhere. It's not, But yeah, the ideas, I think that's one of the things core does really well, because it links these big questions and big ideas to really, in some ways, well thought out and beautiful tools. But not just any old tools. I mean, there's no isoquants in core, thank God.
So can I throw out a random a kind of suggestion on this? Just again, drawing a bit from and tries to answer your question as well. See, I was just wondering whether in choosing that, for example, this choice that you have to make, I feel that now I have a good sense for if I were to go to a classroom, how I could do that. I'm not. It's not me per se I'm saying about, but the facts. So the suggestion here is that all teachers and things must spend 3 to 4 years actually either in government or actually doing this stuff as a practitioner, and then you go back, and then I think maybe that will help you. So maybe you guys are in academia for too long to be just as they said, war is too important to be left to the generals. Maybe designing thing is too kind of important to be left to pure academics. And I do think that now having interacted, I feel I could probably I mean, I wouldn't design a great course or whatever. That a better sense of, what is important, what will engage people, what, the whole point, how do you get the guy to remember the consequence of scarcity rather than the indifference curve. I think maybe there should be much more of that, two-way flow, at least some two-way flow. I'm not saying you should keep going in and out, but maybe. But that's just a radical thing for you to stop teaching here and...
Yeah, so that's Arvind's pitch against specialization and comparative advantage.
Absolutely. My friend, I mean, I don't know how many of you, this is the thing about, the whole interdisciplinary thing. I think C.L.R. James, the greatest cricket writer, had this lovely quote, I think, which applies to all of us, what do they know of cricket who only cricket know? I think that's...
Okay, unless somebody else wants to come in, I think that...
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So this question is to the whole panel, and so I was just wondering, so if someone wants to learn these days, there are so many resources available. You can just go to the internet, there's YouTube, there are millions of videos on whatever you want to learn. You just Google and you can make a search and do it. So my question is, where do you think this future of teaching is going? I mean, how do you attract students to classroom, and why should they come to the classroom when they have all of these whole bunch of things that they have where they can learn from? So.
It's a very good question. It's a great question, and I think the analogous question is, why should we have a New York Times when you can go to Google News and just get news from thousands and thousands of sources? I would say it's curation. It's curation. So you have a group of people who select and assemble a set of material and then communicate it in a way that organizes the world and adds value to simply the constituent or component pieces of information. I think something similar is involved with teaching. Yeah, there's all this stuff out there, but there's information overload. What should you pull together, assemble, and communicate? I don't know if that's right or wrong, but that's the way that I think teaching survives. Yeah. Well, that's what the classroom is doing. The classroom is saying, no, don't go anywhere, come here.
We have, I think, one last maybe comment, and then we should, last one.
So course is to target people who would probably not kind of be an academic job and would probably go to policy. And you really are, maybe, that's one of the target group as it seems. And you're trying to simplify the models in a way that is accessible maybe at a cost of somewhat the precision or rigor of the idea. So just being a theorist, I'm a little bit worried that if a policymaker is not really rigorous about what model they're using, can that be a really disastrous thing for the policy making? Just to give an example, I'm teaching at NYU for past few years, and there are the two different streams, policy and theory, and they try to target policy stream they're going to go to policy, so really no need to teach a lot of models. And sometimes people go through the macro course without learning what a Keynesian model is. And these people are probably going to go and join, say, Fed without knowing what a Keynesian model is, and I'm not sure whether that's an extremely good idea.
I completely agree, but I think actually it's quite the opposite. So the point of it is that you're getting a good overview if you stop at any point along the way. So you're actually not losing anything on complexity. I think if anything, the theory models are more complex than your standard intro course. And in fact, that bears out in the evidence that they've gotten on this has been used for a lot longer in England, and people that go on to subsequent classes in economics perform, if anything, better having used core as their intro textbook. So in fact, Rajiv was saying, the models and also with supply and demand or with isoquants, they're actually making a little bit more complicated. And I mean, in an intro class, you're getting, indifference curves, and you're using them at the level that you probably would use them in an intermediate class, I would say. So I don't think you're losing much there. It's just you get a bigger breadth of theory models, so it's not just the same thing over and over which I think is much more frightening from a policy perspective, that you would think everything should be able to be condensed into one supply-demand model or something like that.
Okay, so with that, I think that we'll bring this final session of the conference to a close. I'd like to thank all the panelists, some of whom have come a very long way. And we'll turn it over to 3D.
Just give me 2 minutes to just to, so we are going to conclude this session with this vote of thanks. So it was a great last 3 days. So let me thank ISI administration, my colleagues, and a lot of staff who are helping throughout. So let me particularly mention Deepmala here. So please give her a big applause. And as I can see, so Ramesh, helping with the computers, and Hawa Singh ji, Amarpal ji, Rohit, like they were whom I do not get to see here, but they were working at the background, the housekeeping staff, the cooks, the service boys, the gardeners. So please, a big applause to them. So, everything apart from just the the snacks and the biscuits were produced in-house, and so like the ISI cooks, the service boys, and they have just produced everything here. And in fact, one of our the StatMed PhD students did cook the prawn malai curry that we have taken. So please a big hand for him. But I mean, for a very smooth running of the conference, I hope all of you will agree that. So for that, I really appreciate the help of my what I call as my army of volunteers, both the PhD and master students. I mean, it's really army, so I cannot name all of them. But let me at least name the team leaders. So if they're here, please stand up, raise your hands. So Param and Gaurav. So they were all with the room arrangements, computer, electronic stuff. So thanks to them. And we have, so as I said, Kaustav and Siddharth, Jeet, they were with the lunch arrangement. And Roli, Swati, Sargam, any of you here? So they were with, and Harshika. So they were with this, so other tea, coffee, snacks, and the, those arrangements. And the core of the team was consisting of these 4 PhD students. So please stand up. Komal, Sujaya, Ohana, please stand up. And Anushree is not here. She's at a conference at IIT Bangalore. But please give them a big hand. Thank you. Just one more. So I finally, a big thanks to all of you for coming here. And so please keep coming, and let's make it a wonderful event, for years in the end.
And we want to thank we'd like to thank the conference organizer, the Caesar behind all this.